Hey everyone, welcome to the O Cheap channel, the channel dedicated to all things cheap in the world of fragrances. And today's video might be a little short. I'm just going to be comparing and contrasting two classic vintage fragrances that have stood the test of time and been worn all over the place. One is a men's fragrance and one is a feminine fragrance. And they're used a lot to say they're similar to each other, but I think that they're both very unique and have their own qualities that make them special. And the two fragrances I'm talking about is Aramis by Aramis, which is a men's marketed fragrance, and then Grès Cabochard, which is a feminine marketed fragrance. The story behind these two that makes me want to talk about them is particularly behind Aramis. So Aramis is a classic man's fragrance. It came out in 1966, and it came out more as a cologne, and then later was re-released as an eau de toilette. It is a very nice masculine leather scent. It was at the time when men's fragrances started combining a lot more of the citrus and the leather, started being a lot more unique, and Aramis was one of those that really stood out. Let's go ahead and go through that note breakdown real quick. On those top notes, you have aldehydes, myrrh, artemisia, clover, thyme, bergamot, and gardenia. On those middle notes, you have patchouli, sage, jasmine, cardamom, orris root, and on those base notes, you have leather, oak moss, musk, vetiver, sandalwood, amber, and coconut. So it's a very aromatic, very woody, citrusy top note, but very oak moss and leather, very heavy fragrance. This is definitely something you would wear in the fall and the wintertime, maybe even the spring, because it is a little light on the beginning part and it dries down a little light. My story behind this is that my grandfather used to wear this all the time. It was one of his signature scents besides polo green and some others, but this was the main one that he was known to wear, and he would soak himself in it every time before church, every time before going out. It became just, anytime you smelled it, you immediately thought of him, which is what a signature scent does. Even after his passing, things that he had owned, like his clothes and shirts, and even his chair he sat in church, still smelled like Aramis because he would douse himself in it so much. But it was his scent. And even besides my grandfather, my father wore this fragrance a lot, and then I picked it up from there and wore it. And it really makes me think of not just my grandfather, but my whole family and my childhood as well. As you know, scent is one of the most powerful memory triggers, and it is very true. And every time I smell this, I can just hear his voice and think of his face. And it's a very nostalgic fragrance. And even though it is a very old school fragrance, I think it still has its place in today. If you are a modern gentleman, I think you can really pull this off because it dries down very aromatic and has that leathery and muskiness and that oak moss, but it's not too loud depending on how much you spray. It is very nice, it's very smooth. I think it's a great woody chypre fragrance. It's very nice. And it's very undoubtedly classy, sophisticated, masculine smell. A lot of people might say this is outdated, and it might be for some, especially the younger crowd now, but I think there's still a lot of older gentlemen, maybe 30 years or older, who would be able to appreciate this and like this. And if you're a collector, I definitely recommend you getting this fragrance. It's also very inexpensive. You can buy this online for less than $20. You can buy it on rack stores, less than $20. I used to have the aftershave and the body wash and the 100 ml size ball of this until I used all that up. And so my wife got me this for Christmas this past year, and it was very nostalgic again, very memorable, and I love this scent so much. But again, very masculine, leather, woody, aromatic fragrance. Still usable today. But the fragrance that Aramis gets compared a lot to is Grès Cabochard. Cabochard is a line of fragrances that span well over 60 years. So the first Cabochard came out in 1959, and then in 2019 there was a re-release as an eau de toilette, and then later re-released as an eau de parfum, and this is the eau de parfum, which is the one that I would recommend to you. I got this fragrance based on a recommendation from Dan from the Mr. Smelly 1977 channel, in which he said it's a very nice, sophisticated, classy, vintage smelling fragrance, and he said even though it's marketed as a feminine fragrance, it very much can be used as a masculine fragrance since it has that old school kind of smell and that similarity to Aramis. And I would really have to agree that this does have that feminine touch, but I can definitely see it leaning a little masculine, especially compared to today's standards. And some of you might think that with the bow on this that it still keeps a little femininity, but I actually really like the bow. I think it adds a nice touch to it, and you don't see things like that a whole lot nowadays. Very nice fragrance, very, very high quality, but it's also a cheapie, under $20 on Fragrance Buy is when I got this. Very inexpensive, very doable. I wanna go ahead and go through the note breakdown with you real quick on the Cabochard. On those top notes, you have aldehydes, galbanum, and sage. On those middle notes, you have ylang ylang, rose, and jasmine. And on those base notes, you have oak moss, leather, patchouli, and sandalwood. So as you can tell, Cabochard is also a very woody, slightly aromatic, floral, aldehydic, oak mossy fragrance. And it definitely is, not just in the note breakdown, but how it comes across. And you can tell that there's a lot of note similarities between Aramis and Cabochard. Another interesting thing is that these two were actually made by the same perfumer, Bernard Chant. He actually made Cabochard, the very first one, in 1959, and then later in 1966 released Aramis, and then later in 2019 released all the other Cabochard reiterations. And he also did the other Aramis flankers. There's a lot of Aramis flankers. They're very hard to find. Most, if not all of them, are discontinued. So if you do find them for a good price, highly recommend them, and I'm trying to get them myself. So what are the similarities and the differences between the two? Besides having the same perfumer, they do have that same scent DNA running through them and a lot of the same notes. But to me, Aramis is a lot smoother, it's a lot more well-rounded, it's a lot more balanced in a way, and I think it's because it does come off a lot more aromatic than Cabochard. It is definitely a lot more masculine leaning. I see myself gravitating more to this than Cabochard, but then again, I don't know if it's because of my nostalgic memories of this fragrance or if it's because of that masculine draw. But I do like this one. It is not as noticeable, however, not as powerful as Cabochard. It does not have as long lasting, depending on how much you spray on, or projecting, depending on how much you spray on. But it is a lot more aromatic, a lot more powdery, and a lot more, again, smoother and rounded. It's probably gonna be easier to smell than Cabochard. However, Cabochard, what makes it different from Aramis is it's a lot more aldehydic and is a lot more floral. That's what gives that femininity to it. And those aldehydes really push those florals. It's very almost piercing, but not in a bad way. They're just a lot more noticeable. It really pushes them. But as it dries down, it begins to have a lot more of that Aramis quality with those aromatics and that leather and that oak moss. They are definitely very similar, but this one, also because it is an eau de parfum, is a lot better performing. It lasts way longer. It's easily 8 hours when Aramis might be 6 hours. And actually I think this might be a little over 8 hours. It's a lot more loudly projecting, maybe about a foot, 2 feet within the first couple hours, when Aramis might sit a little closer to the skin a little sooner. And usually you would think with Aramis being an eau de toilette that it would project a lot more for a little longer, and that with this being an eau de parfum, it would sit closer to the skin a little sooner. That's not usually the case, at least not with these two. It varies with scent profile, the fragrance to fragrance, and what's in them. But with what I've found, Aramis, it still projects a good bit, especially for that first hour. But because of the eau de toilette and because of the quality of ingredients in it, it isn't going to be as well performing as Cabochard. Now, it's not to say it doesn't perform at all. It's just not going to be as good performing as Cabochard, because both of these have that vintage quality to them. They both have that old school vibe and that old school formulation. So they are definitely going to push out, and they're going to be a huge, loud projecting attention grabber. But in comparison, Cabochard has the upper hand on performance over Aramis. But Aramis, to me, is a little more softer than Cabochard, and it's because of the florals and the aldehydes in this one. However, I still think both of these are very wearable, and not just for women to wear this one, but I think men can also wear Cabochard just as easily as Aramis. I think Cabochard has, again, has more floral take on Aramis. So you can have different situations where you can pick it out and say, I might want to have a little more florals in this end, you know, being in the springtime and whatnot, or I may want it to be a little more loud projecting. I may want it to pierce out a little more, and someone wear this one when you may be going a little more spring when it gets a tad warmer but not too warm, or you may be in a crowd and you don't want to project too much or smother, and so you want to be a little softer but still classic and masculine. So you might want to wear Aramis, since Aramis is a little more soft on that end with those aromatics. These are definitely both amazing fragrances, especially for the price point. They both, again, in their own right, perform very well, and they both have very unique qualities to them. But now beware, if you do not like that old school kind of vibe, you are not going to like these. Personally, again, I grew up around it. I love the old school vibe. I love old school cheapies, and I don't mind wearing them. I will wear them all day long, and I have. To me, it doesn't bother me. I really like it, but some out there, if you're wanting a more modern smell and more modern take and more up-to-date fragrances, you're not gonna like these. But for those of you who are collectors, or you love the old school scent and you are old enough or mature enough that you can pull them off, I definitely recommend these two. Aramis by Aramis and Grès Cabochard, that EDP, the Eau de Parfum. They're very sophisticated, classy, very mature and vintage fragrances. I highly recommend these if you ever find them for a good price, and I think you can find them under $20. Definitely pick them up and try them out. And that's all I got for the day, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider liking and commenting on the video. And if you like these kind of comparison videos, let me know in the comments. Let me know of ones that you would like me to compare and put against each other in the future. Or if you buy these two, or if you have these, the Aramis or Cabochard, let me know in the comments if you like them, if you don't like them, or even other vintage fragrances that you like and that you'd recommend for me to try out. Again, guys, I appreciate you being here with me and for watching the video. Hope y'all have a good one. Be blessed.